Fallout Equestria, Pure Hearts, Chapter 1, First Steps. My dearest teacher, my continuing studies of pony magic have led me to discover that we are on the precipice of disaster. Another boring day at work. Life as a stable security officer tends to be uneventful, especially in a stable as small as the one I call home. While I didn't dislike my job, I sometimes longed for something more. I often dreamt of having big adventures in places I had heard of and learned about in school, but I was only ever able to imagine these places as they had been in the past, though seeing as is I spent my years growing up in the stable and never knew what had actually become of the outside world. Stable 61, the smallest of all the Stable-Tech stables, only held 210 ponies at its maximum. Now there are only 152 of us left after a large amount of the older population had succumbed to disease. An unknown plague had run rampant amongst the residents in the last few years before it simply disappeared. Living in such a small community caused us to grow very close to each other. Every pony knew every pony else, though it also meant that there were few ponies to fill all those positions required to keep the stable in working order. Every pony had their roles, and every role had its pony. We managed to keep everything running smoothly for generations, despite a few hiccups along the way, but this small workforce meant that I was actually the only security officer in the stable. It's probably a good thing that work was so uneventful. There would be no way one pony could keep up with things if they got too hectic. I stepped into my quarters and laid my security pistol and other tools on my desk. The vent started blowing hot air, warming the room to a comfortable temperature. I felt the breeze against my light gray coat, and it wafted gently through my golden mane and lightly armored security body. I closed my eyes and imagined a white dove carrying a red heart in its grip as it flew aloft in that breeze. The very same image that was my cutie mark. The story behind the mark, well, I try not to think about it. As peaceful as the image itself seems, its history isn't quite as nice. Dovetail! I was snapped back to reality to see a mint green unicorn mare with a long, flowing white mane standing in the doorway of my room. She pushed a pair of reading glasses that sat in front of her bright blue eyes back into place. They always had a tendency to slip down her muzzle. Oh. Hey there, Lily Bloom. Don't hey Lily Bloom me like nothing's wrong. Don't tell me you forgot. I was a little confused at this. I didn't think I had missed anything, but I had the feeling that Lily was going to fill me in on what it was regardless. Today is the day the Overmare selects 2 ponies for a scouting mission out of the stable. I brought my pit buck up and checked the date, and slapped my forehead with my hoof. Of course, how could I forget? You can be quite forgetful sometimes, Dove, Lily said teasingly. I shot her a cross look, but lightened up as we both started giggling a little bit. It was true that I was a little bit forgetful. Well, I guess we better hurry along then, I suggested. With a nod, Lily turned back out of my door, and I caught a glimpse of her cutie mark, a Stable-Tech terminal with a holotape next to it. I always envied her for her skills with Stable-Tech equipment of all sorts. She once hacked in my pit buck from a remote terminal just to display a big old "Hi!" on the screen for the fun of it. As smart as she was, though, she was also a little mischievous, sometimes too much for her own good. The walk through the stable wasn't a long one, given the shelter's size, though it felt long. The dull gray metal walls all blended together into a labyrinth of turns and straights, halls and stairs. The dim lights that illuminated them seemed to be ever burning and gave the whole place a very somber, boring mood. Every once in a while, one of them would flicker for a few seconds, and I would take notice of it, but would pass it by without a second thought. The entire stable, while it was my home, just felt confining. Anything more than the daily routine was rare, and even then it was short-lived. The most exciting thing that I could remember was the one I didn't want to remember. As we walked, I began to imagine the walls of the stable fading away, replaced by a daydreamer's fantasy world. The next thing I knew, I had a throbbing headache in my head as my vision swam violently. Lily, who now put her hoof on my shoulder to steady me, struggled to ask if I was okay through the fit of laughter she had befallen her. Coming to my senses, I realized now that I had walked headfirst into one of the stable's many locker doors that lined the atrium. Some pony had left one open, and, being lost in my own little world again, as I followed Lily through the atrium, I had neglected to see it. I also took notice that it wasn't just Lily Bloom who was laughing at me. The entire stable population was there laughing their flanks off at my embarrassment. Ahem. The booming voice of an older mare filled the open room, and the stable fell silent. The overmare had stepped out of her office, horn glowing with a voice amplifying spell, ready to address her subjects. The platform on which she now stood overhung the atrium. From there, every pony could see her clearly. I blushed a little, rubbing my aching head, and turned my attention to the same point that every pony else was now focused on. My fellow stable-dwellers, I trust you all know why you've been gathered here, but in case you've forgotten, let me remind you. Stable 61 has been in operation for 200 years now, and while we reached the predetermined point at which Stable Tech required us to open the stable doors years ago, the previous overmares found it best to keep them shut. I, however, feel that with our bicentennial anniversary of the stable's closing, it is time for us to step out into the world above. Our first order of business is to send out a scouting party to make contact with whoever or whatever is out there and analyze any immediate threats. An applause of celebration broke out, and the overmare called once again for calm. Now, Stable Tech calls for scouting parties to consist of 3 or more ponies. But since there are so few of us, I would feel better only sending parties of 2. So, any volunteers? Despite the early enthusiasm at the mention of getting out of this happy imprisonment and into the outside world, not a soul stirred at this prompt. Not even Lily. I knew she dreamed of getting out of this place as much as I did. I guess she was just stifled by the crowd's overall initiative, or lack thereof. As for why I didn't volunteer myself, I guess I was just a dreamer instead of an adventurer. I wanted to leave the stable, but I couldn't work up the courage to do so of my own accord. I thought as much, the overmare continued. She sounded a little dismayed as she surveyed the crowd for any change. I took the initiative and fed the names of every pony in the stable through our mainframe to determine those best suited for the job. The first choice should have been obvious, given the unknown nature of the outside world. We need some pony with some sort of safety and firearms proficiency. As much as I didn't want to hear the name she was about to call, I knew exactly who she was talking about. After all, I was the only security officer, and the only one with firearms training. I felt my stomach lurch, not sure if it was out of excitement or fear. Dovetail, as our security officer, you should be well qualified for this role. I knew now it was fear. I wanted nothing more than to disappear as the crowd directed its attention toward me once more. My heart told me this was my chance to leave these walls, but my mind kept telling me to say no. There was no denying the overmare, though. Yes, ma'am. I'll do my best, I managed to mutter out sheepishly. I looked at Lily nervously. Her face had grown a little solemn. I imagined she was afraid that I would be leaving her behind. I opened my mouth to tell her that it would be okay, but I was cut off as the overmare called out the next name. Lily Bloom, you will accompany Dovetail as our partner. Your technical skills should come in handy for any technology you come across that's still working out there. My friend's expression turned from one of near depression to sheer excitement. Her eyes lit up brighter than the brightest light in the stable at this, though it wasn't saying much, as she promptly informed me why. Well, I wasn't really wanting to go myself, which is why I didn't volunteer, but now we'll be braving a new world together. Isn't that exciting, Dove? Yeah, I guess, I replied, still not really sure, or more likely when, I was going to vomit from the nerves that had gripped my stomach and turn it into some form of pre-war pretzels I had read about somewhere. I wish I had the same fortitude as my friend. That settles it then, the overman proceeded. You'll leave first thing tomorrow morning. So, what do you think we'll find out there? Lily raised a good question as she slipped her equipment into her saddlebags. I shrugged. Even with all the reading I had done about the old world above, there really wasn't any telling what lay beyond the stable door. For all we knew, it could have still been a fertile green world, or it could have been a hellish empty waste. My bets were on the latter. But then again, there may not even be an outside world anymore. Well, whatever we encounter out there, I'm glad we're doing it together, Lily said, breaking me from my own thoughts on what we discovered and shifting them elsewhere. She had, for the longest time, liked me as more than a friend, and she wasn't shy about it. She had tried a few relationships with the fine colts our age, but nothing ever stuck. She always told me it was that she couldn't keep her mind on them and that it kept drifting back to me. I just never could bring myself to accept the idea. I simply couldn't see her as more than my best friend, even when I tried. I had my mind set on colts, but my luck with them had always kept me single. And then I jumped. The door to the room we were preparing in had opened abruptly, scanned me back into the familiar dull gray of the stable. The overmare stepped in and looked us over with scrutinizing eyes as she hummed little affirmations to herself. Well, she began, it seems you are both fairly ready. I looked down. I didn't even realize that I had mindlessly completed packing my saddlebags, filled my water canteen, slugged my holstered 10mm security pistol and my other bags over my back, and was all ready to go, equipment-wise at least. I turned to see Lily had done the same. Wait, what do you mean fairly ready? I inquired. I only say fairly, since there is no telling what's out there. My mind flashed back to my earlier thoughts. There is no preparing you completely for the unknown. The most I can offer you is some advice. Expect the unexpected, and whatever happens, trust in each other. You are each other's greatest strengths. We both nodded to the overman, then to each other. I couldn't see how we could ever be torn apart. All right, then. If you two are ready, let's proceed. Following the overman out of the room and into the much bigger chamber behind it, I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. This is going to be my first time, or rather the first time for any of Stable 61's residents, outside our dreary, but strangely homey walls. And I was more nervous than I could ever remember being before. Then my heart just about stopped as the rush of fear, adrenaline, or whatever it was, flooded over me. The overman pulled the lever on the nearby console, and the whole place shook as mechanisms hidden somewhere began to work. The room was filled with control panels, and on the side opposite the door we entered through was a huge gear-shaped hulk of metal wedged solidly into its purpose-built slot in the wall. Above hung a giant control arm that now swung down to make contact with the steel gear. My imagination began to picture a big, black, empty void on the other side of that door, and it would open and there'd be nothing there, and we'd all be sucked into its endless space. An ear-shattering screech resounded from the room, amplified by the metal walls, and the door to Stable 61 was pried out from its centuries-old resting place and rolled to the side. Revealed on the other side was not the desolate nothingness I had pictured, but instead there was a long, dark tunnel of natural rock. Far up the tunnel, I could barely make out traces of light that seeped in through the cracks of what looked to be an old door. When the sound of grinding metal finally ceased, the entrance to the stable finally stood agape before us. The overman addressed us once again. It is time to us to part ways for now. Report back to us after 1 week's time with your finding. Also, here's a little gift for me to help you with your mission. She then pulled out 2 shiny new pit bugs from her saddlebag. They were obviously much nicer than her old 2000 model. These are the latest pit bug model, the 4000 series. The logs say we were only issued 2 for experimental purposes by Stable Tech, but we never actually needed them. She elaborated as we swapped out our old ones for the new ones, powered them on, and gave her a quick thanks. Now go on, you two. Good luck. Nodding to each other, Lily and I took our first steps outside our metal home.
The dirt under our hooves was much softer and more pliable than what we had in our synthetic underground farms, and it seemed so much more, well, natural. And then when we turned with a jerk, as the mechanisms behind us sprung into life once more, sealing the stable off from us. My heart wrenched. I was leaving my home. It took everything I had to avert my gaze from that gateway back to safety, but eventually I was able to turn my attention back to the tunnel and the door ahead of us. I was finally going to get that big adventure I had dreamed of, even if it did feel a little forced on me now. I remembered an old saying I had read in one of my favorite books. Kites highs rise against the wind, not with it. Come on, Lily, let's do this, while I still have the will to not turn back again. She pulled her own eyes away from our past and back toward the future that lay just beyond that tattered wooden door. Our own adventure awaited on the other side. As we approached it, it was evident that the door hadn't been disturbed since the stable closed. The hinges were rusted through, and it looked like they could have given way with the slightest amount of force. The wood was terribly rotten and warped despite its visual condition. It still moved smoothly as I turned the lock and cracked it open. A blinding light began to overthrow the darkness, and the more I pulled, and eventually it overtook my vision. We were finally free. Footnote: level up. New perk: security training, +5 to small guns. You are 20% more accurate with small guns, but fire 10% slower.